There is an island in the South Pacific, 2,000 miles from anywhere, and there is a story about it that almost everyone knows. The story says the people who lived there cut down every tree, that they did it to move their statues, that when the forest was gone they starved and turned on each other and collapsed. It is told as a warning, a small island standing in for a larger one. The story has a beginning we can date precisely. In 1992, two researchers published a book built on a pollen record. The sediment at the bottom of the island's crater lakes showed palm trees and then no palm trees. 13 years later, that reading became the opening chapter of one of the most widely read books about human failure ever written. It was drawn from other people's fieldwork. No new excavation, a pollen record, and a moral. And it should be said plainly, because it is often not. The argument was never that the island died in a single afternoon. It described a sequence, a slow ruin, hastened by what came after. That is the version worth arguing with. The first thing to go was the timeline. For decades it was thought people reached the island around the year 800. In 2006, a re-examination of the basal layers at Anakena and of the radiocarbon dates themselves moved that arrival to around 1200. 5 years later, a survey of 1,434 dates across 15 Polynesian archipelagos found the same thing, a single late wave. The current consensus is 1150 to 1280, which means the human history of this island is roughly half as long as the story required, and nothing was discovered to prove it. The old dates rested on samples that are no longer considered reliable. The change came from better sampling, not from finding something new, from reading more carefully what was already there. Then the evidence for the collapse itself began to thin. The great earthwork on the Poike Peninsula, described as a defensive trench from a war of extermination, is now argued to be a geological remnant, an old shoreline where one volcano met another. There is no recorded ditch-and-embankment and no palisade anywhere on the island. The obsidian blades called mata, long read as spearheads, were measured. Their shapes were compared. They were, in the words of the study, not specifically designed for interpersonal violence, but general-purpose tools. And the bones, 476 skulls have been examined. 112 show injury. 11 show injuries that killed. Injury was common, killing was not. Then the last thing. If the society collapsed around 1600, the great stone platforms should stop being built. A model combining radiocarbon dates, construction stratigraphy and historical accounts found that they do not stop. Construction continues at a steady rate, past 1600, past 1700, and past the arrival of the first European ship. The monuments outlive the collapse. This is the point at which it would be easy to say the collapse never happened. It would also be false. The forest fell. On that there is no argument at all, not from any side. And it did not simply fade. In the soils of the Poike Peninsula there are burned palm stumps, charred palm nuts, and scorched ground dated to between 1250 and 1500. Not ash. Ash would only tell us something burned. Stumps still rooted where they stood tell us it was cleared, deliberately, by people. Every land bird on the island, all 6 species, is gone, and whole districts were abandoned. Dating the volcanic glass at habitation sites shows the poorer, higher, drier ground emptying out before any European ship appeared. There is more. Two independent records, drawn from the waxes of ancient leaves in two separate crater lakes, reconstruct the island's rainfall. From around 1550, it falls by 600 to 800 millimeters a year and stays low for over a century. That drought coincides with the slowing of monument construction. Coincides. The study says coincides, and so do we. And then there is the hardest piece of all. In 1774, when Cook's ships anchored here, his party described a people reduced and under strain, and monuments already falling. That is 88 years before anything we are about to describe. It is the strongest evidence the old story has. It does not go away, so the correction is not an acquittal. Something happened on this island, and some of it was done by the people living on it. The question was never whether the island changed. It is what happened to the people. For that, we do not need archaeology. We have paperwork. In December 1862, 8 ships arrived from Peru. Goods were laid out on the beach. Armed men waited. 1,400 people were taken, roughly a third of everyone alive on the island. They were shipped to the guano mines. Almost none came back, fewer than 20. And the few who returned carried smallpox ashore. Then tuberculosis. Then, in 1871, missionaries evacuated 275 more to Tahiti and Mangareva. In 1877, someone counted the people left. 111. They are listed by name, by age, by family. Every Rapanui alive today descends from that page, and of those 111, only 36 ever had children. What followed was not recovery. The island was leased to a sheep company. Almost all of it was fenced. The Rapanui were confined to a single settlement behind a wall and needed permission to leave it. That arrangement ended in 1953, not in the distant past, within living memory. There was also a script, wooden tablets, covered in a writing system that has never been read. In 1864, a missionary found them in houses across the island and found that their owners could no longer read them. 1864 is 2 years after the ships. The raids took the chiefs and the men trained to recite. It is the obvious explanation. It is also an inference. No European ever saw the script read. We do not know what was on them. We know when the ability to know was taken. In 2017, 5 individuals from a burial site at Anakena were sequenced. The question was whether Rapa Nui had contact with South America before Europeans arrived. The answer was no. The study rejected the hypothesis that any of them carried substantial Native American ancestry. In 2024, 15 more individuals were sequenced. Every one of them carried it. 2 studies. Same island, same method, opposite answers. The second team resolved it by taking their own data and degrading it. They reduced their genomes to the coverage depth of the earlier study, around 1/10,000th of a single read across the genome, 1,000 times thinner. And at that depth, the signal vanished from their data too. The earlier study had not found nothing. It had been unable to see. The evidence had not changed. The instrument had. And this is where a documentary is supposed to say that the case is closed. So it is worth reading what the study actually claims. It rejects a severe collapse in the 1600s. Severe is defined. The models it rules out are those leaving between 10 and 50% of the population alive. A decline of 40% is not ruled out. The paper's lead author put it plainly: what is excluded is a collapse where 80 or 90% died. The genomes also cannot count people. Effective population size is not a head count, and the authors say so. The figure widely reported, that the island never held more than 3,000, is not in the study. It appears in the commentary written about it, and on the ecology the authors are unambiguous. Their data, they write, cannot be used to evaluate the ecological impact of human activity on the island. The genomes were never about the trees. The headline said, "Proved, debunks, refutes. Once and for all," the paper says, "cannot be used." Both of those sentences are in the public record, and the distance between them is the subject of this film. For most of a century, the case for contact across the Pacific rested on two things: a vegetable and a bird. The sweet potato is American. It was growing in Polynesia before Europeans could have carried it. And bones from a site on the Chilean coast were argued to be Polynesian chickens, brought east before Columbus. Each rested, in the end, on a single specimen. The chicken did not survive retesting. The genetic marker that identifies Polynesian chickens is absent from the site and absent from South America entirely. A new excavation in 2025 confirmed the site is pre-Columbian and found its connections ran inland to Argentina. The date survived, the chicken did not, and nothing was retracted. That word is worth avoiding. Nothing in this field has been withdrawn. The arguments were settled the slow way, by other people publishing other evidence. The sweet potato was attacked too. In 2018, a study argued it had drifted across the ocean on its own, with no human help at all. That argument still stands in the literature. It is simply no longer the stronger one. There is no wild sweet potato anywhere in the Indo-Pacific. Which leaves the oldest evidence of all, and the least expected: a word. The Eastern Polynesian word for sweet potato is kumala. In the Andes, the word is kumar. Linguists have argued about that pair since 1865. It is now generally accepted. There is one more story, and it is the one this film is most obliged to tell carefully. In 2013, Polynesian DNA was found in skulls held in a museum in Rio de Janeiro. It was reported around the world as evidence that Polynesians had reached Brazil before Columbus. The scientists who made the discovery had said the opposite. In the paper itself, they called that explanation too unlikely to be seriously entertained. The likeliest answer now is a labeling error. Two skulls sent from a museum in New Zealand to a museum in Brazil in the 1880s. The claim was never a scientific one. It was ours. The press made it, and in the end, neither the vegetable, nor the bird, nor the skulls proved the contact. The genomes did. Around 10% Native American ancestry in people who carried no European ancestry at all. If it had come on European ships, it would have arrived with European ancestry beside it. It did not. The meeting is real. Who crossed the water is not known. Neither study establishes it, and both say so. The DNA proves a meeting. It does not name the sailors. The two studies that dismantled the collapse story were not done to the Rapa Nui. A Rapa Nui archaeologist is an author on the genomics paper. A Rapa Nui researcher is an author on the study of the island's farmland. The genetic data is not public. A Rapa Nui commission decides who may use it. 15 ancestors remain in a museum in Paris, collected in 1877 and 1935. The community's position on them is not complicated. They belong back in the island. And there is one more thing in the record, which is an absence. For 70 years, this question has been argued in pollen, in radiocarbon, in obsidian, and in genomes. In all that time, nobody systematically asked the Rapa Nui what they remember. One geneticist has said so publicly. He notes that the oral histories name ancestors from the Americas and say which way the canoes went, which is the one question the genomes cannot answer. We should be honest about our own position here. This film was made from published evidence. We did not ask them either. The trees came down, the birds went. Some of that was done by the people who lived here, and the record says so. But the island did not kill them. Ships did. Disease did. Offence did. 1,400 people were taken in 1862. 111 were counted in 1877. That is the collapse. It has a date and a document and a name. For 40 years, the world told a story in which they did it to themselves. It was told by people who never asked them, including us.